The most dangerous person on a dating app may not be the man who looks threatening. It may be the one whose profile gives you nothing to fear. Sydney Shaw has reached the point where hope feels embarrassing. Dating in New York has become a parade of small humiliations. Misleading photographs, invented careers, conversations that turn into monologues, and men who believe basic courtesy deserves a reward. Each bad date leaves behind more than annoyance. It changes the way she enters the next one. A little less open, a little more watchful, a little more tired of pretending that disappointment is funny. Then she meets Tom. He is handsome, calm, accomplished, and attentive without seeming rehearsed. He works as a doctor. He listens when Sydney speaks. He notices discomfort instead of exploiting it. In a city full of men who seem determined to prove how little they care, Tom appears to care in exactly the right ways. That should be the beginning of relief. Instead, it becomes the beginning of suspicion. Women are being murdered. The crimes are frightening not only because of their violence, but because they seem to belong to the same shadow moving through the city. The victims are not abstract names in a headline. They are women who trusted ordinary routines, accepted dates, returned home, and believed they could distinguish awkwardness from danger. As details emerge, Sydney begins to understand that the killer may not be hunting from some distant, unknowable darkness. He may be using the same world she uses, the same restaurants, the same streets, the same digital doorway through which strangers introduce themselves with a smile and a few carefully chosen facts. And the closer Sydney gets to Tom, the more terrifying the central question becomes. Has she finally found the perfect boyfriend, or has a killer found the perfect victim? Freida McFadden's The Boyfriend builds its unease around a modern contradiction. Dating apps promise access to more people than any previous generation could have imagined, yet they often provide less context than an introduction through friends, family, work, or community. A face appears on a screen, a name, an age, a profession, a handful of photographs selected to imply an entire life. The profile looks like information, but much of it is self-description. A stranger gets to write his own evidence. Most people use that freedom harmlessly. They choose flattering pictures, make ordinary jobs sound more exciting, or pretend to enjoy hiking because everyone else seems to enjoy hiking. The danger begins when presentation is not an exaggeration but a construction, when charm is used to accelerate trust before reality has time to catch up. Sydney is not foolish. She understands that people lie online. Experience has taught her to expect it. Yet expecting small dishonesty can make large dishonesty harder to see. When minor deception becomes normal, a person learns to discount it. The outdated photograph is annoying. The false height is predictable. The vague relationship status is suspicious but common. Each compromise lowers the threshold slightly, until the question is no longer whether someone is honest. It is whether his dishonesty seems more tolerable than everyone else's. Then Tom appears to clear the lowered bar so completely that he feels extraordinary. This is one of the story's sharpest psychological tensions. Perfection does not exist in isolation. It is measured against what came before. After enough careless men, a thoughtful one can feel miraculous. After enough dates spent calculating how to leave politely, safety itself can feel romantic. Sydney does not merely desire Tom. She desires the end of searching. There is a special exhaustion in repeating the beginning of intimacy, the same questions, the same compressed biography, the same hopeful interpretation of a message, the same effort to look interested while quietly evaluating risk. Every new date requires a woman to be socially open and physically cautious at the same time. Those demands pull in opposite directions. She must appear relaxed without actually relaxing. Tom seems to offer an exit from that tension. His profession suggests competence. His manner suggests empathy. His attention suggests seriousness. He appears to be a man with a stable identity, a useful role, and a life that makes sense. But a convincing identity is not the same as a true one. The city's murders transform every attractive quality into a possible disguise. Confidence can be charm or practice. Medical knowledge can be reassuring or disturbing. Calmness can reflect emotional stability or the absence of ordinary fear. The more perfect Tom appears, the more Sydney is forced to wonder whether perfection is itself the warning. This is where the thriller turns a familiar romantic fantasy inside out. In love stories, the ideal partner proves that earlier disappointments were preparing the heroine for someone better. In a psychological crime story, the same sequence can look like conditioning. The bad dates exhaust her defenses. The good man arrives when she is most ready to believe. A trap is most effective when it resembles an answer. Sydney's fear does not arrive fully formed. It accumulates through details that refuse to remain separate. A woman is killed. Another connection appears. A clue changes the meaning of something Tom has said. A gap in his story no longer feels harmless. The mind begins performing a task it hates, holding love and danger in the same picture. People often imagine suspicion as cold. In reality, suspicion inside a relationship is painfully emotional. Sydney does not want Tom to be guilty. Every clue threatens more than her safety. It threatens the future she has started to imagine. A dinner next week, a weekend away, the relief of deleting the apps, the quiet dignity of telling friends that this one feels different. Hope becomes evidence for the defense. She remembers his kindness. She recalls the expression on his face when he seemed concerned. She tells herself that a dangerous man would not behave that way. Yet dangerous people do not spend every hour displaying danger. If they did, they would lose access to the people they intend to control. The frightening question is not whether a killer can act normal. It is how much normality we require before we stop looking. In a large city, anonymity is ordinary. A person can have routines, relationships, and entire histories that never touch. Coworkers may know one version, friends know another. A date sees only the small portion he chooses to reveal. This separation is not automatically sinister. Everyone has private rooms in the self. The problem begins when privacy becomes unverifiability. A healthy person may have boundaries, but his life develops texture over time. Stories connect. Friends exist. Work has ordinary inconvenience. Past relationships carry complexity rather than vanishing into vague accusations. When he makes a mistake, the explanation reduces confusion instead of expanding it. A constructed identity behaves differently. It is polished in the center and blurry at the edges. The parts designed to impress are specific. The parts that might be checked remain strangely abstract. Questions produce emotion rather than information. The listener leaves the conversation knowing more about why she should not have asked than about what she asked in the first place. Sydney begins to experience this unstable boundary between reassurance and evasion. She wants facts, but she also wants the facts to preserve the relationship. That desire matters because the mind does not evaluate information neutrally when the result carries emotional cost. If Tom is innocent, she has found something rare. If he is guilty, she has invited danger close enough to learn her habits. The difference is almost too large to contemplate, so the mind bargains. Perhaps the timing is coincidence. Perhaps the uncomfortable detail has an innocent explanation. Perhaps fear created by the murders is contaminating her judgment. Perhaps she is punishing a good man for the crimes of someone she has never met. Each possibility is reasonable on its own. Together, they can become a shelter for denial. The story gains power from this ambiguity because real danger rarely arrives with labels. Suspicion must compete with fairness. A person who has been disappointed before may be determined not to become cynical. She may take pride in judging people as individuals. A manipulator can exploit that moral instinct. He does not need her to ignore the truth forever. He needs her to delay accepting it until leaving becomes harder. Time changes the cost of doubt. On the first date, walking away requires almost nothing. After intimacy, promises, shared routines, and emotional investment, doubt threatens an entire structure. The longer a relationship continues, the more evidence the heart demands before it will authorize escape. This is the cruel arithmetic of attachment. Trust often increases faster than knowledge. Tom's status as a doctor intensifies that effect. Society gives certain professions moral weight. A doctor is trained to heal, to remain calm during crisis, and to enter private spaces with permission. Those associations are powerful. They allow competence to borrow the appearance of goodness. Yet skill and character are different qualities. A person can understand the body without respecting the person inside it. He can perform care as a profession and use care as a social disguise. The white coat, whether literal or imagined, can become part of the romance because it promises reliability, intelligence, and purpose. Sydney is not only seeing Tom, him. She is seeing what his role implies. This is how social proof works. We use visible markers to estimate invisible traits. Education suggests discipline. Professional success suggests stability. Good manners suggest empathy. These shortcuts are useful because no one can investigate every stranger from the beginning. But shortcuts can be engineered. The killer moving through the story understands that women are not simply looking for beauty. They are looking for signs that beauty is safe. He does not need to eliminate fear. He needs to provide a convincing reason for fear to stand down. A woman navigating modern dating often conducts this assessment quietly. She sends a friend the location. She watches her drink. She notices whether he becomes irritated by a boundary. She calculates the distance to a crowded street. These behaviors are so common they can become invisible, treated as the background cost of seeking companionship. The novel brings that background fear into the foreground. The murders make the calculation explicit. A date is no longer merely a possible disappointment. He may be the last stranger a woman ever trusts. Still, fear cannot be the only guide. If Sydney treated every man as a potential killer, connection would become impossible. This is the dilemma the story refuses to simplify. Safety requires caution, but intimacy requires uncertainty. No checklist can guarantee innocence. No profession can certify character. No chemistry can prove danger either. Sydney must make decisions before certainty arrives. That is what makes the investigation personal. Evidence in a criminal case is evaluated according to formal standards. Evidence in a relationship is filtered through memory, desire, embarrassment, and the fear of being wrong. She does not possess a complete file. She has impressions, contradictions, and the changing feeling of being watched by someone she once believed was protecting her. A clue can be small and still alter the emotional temperature of a room. A question answered too carefully. A story with one detail missing. A reaction stronger than the situation requires. A piece of information he should not know. None proves murder. Each asks for another look. The thriller's deeper subject is not simply whether Tom is a killer. It is the instability of knowing another person. Love often begins with acts of interpretation. He remembered my order, so he listens. He called after the date, so he is serious. He shared something painful, so he trusts me. These interpretations may be accurate. They may also be exactly what someone intends us to conclude. We do not fall in love with raw behavior. We fall in love with meaning. A practiced deceiver controls meaning by controlling context. A late arrival becomes evidence of dedication to work. Secrecy becomes evidence of an old wound. Jealousy becomes evidence of love. A sudden disappearance becomes an emergency that makes him seem even more necessary when he returns. Sydney's task is to separate what Tom did from the story attached to it. That separation is psychologically difficult because explanations create emotional order. Without them, behavior becomes frighteningly open. The late arrival might mean work, another woman, surveillance, or something worse. The mind prefers a flawed explanation to an infinite field of threat. The murders remove that comfort one victim at a time. Each dead woman changes the probability inside Sydney's imagination. The pattern becomes harder to dismiss. The killer appears to select women with a terrible intimacy, as though desire and destruction occupy the same private space. The crimes are not random explosions of anger. They suggest selection, control, and a ritualized need to take something from the victim beyond her life. For Sydney, the investigation transforms romance into retrospective evidence. She begins replaying moments that once felt tender. Was that concern or assessment? Was that question affectionate, or was he collecting information? Did he arrive by chance, or had he already been watching? Betrayal changes the past without changing a single event. The restaurant remains the same. The words remain the same. The hand across the table remains warm in memory. Only the interpretation darkens. This is one reason discovering deception can feel physically disorienting. The mind stores memories with emotional labels: safe, loving, awkward, funny. When new information arrives, those labels must be rewritten. The person does not simply learn a fact. She loses confidence in the meaning of her own experience. Sydney is forced to ask whether the relationship happened to her in the way she believed it did. That question contains shame. People who suspect they have been deceived often become preoccupied with how they appeared to the deceiver. Did he laugh after she left? Did he repeat her private words? Was her happiness part of the game? Shame turns the victim inward. It asks her to explain why she did not know what someone else worked to conceal. The better question is simpler. What information did she have at the time? Tom appears charming, successful, and attentive. Sydney's belief is not irrational. It is a conclusion drawn from curated evidence. If that evidence is false, the moral failure belongs to the curator. The story's tension also reaches backward into a past that complicates every assumption made in the present. Psychological thrillers often use two timelines, not merely to hide information, but to show how identity is constructed over years. The adult who appears fully formed has a history. Old injuries, loyalties, obsessions, and choices do not disappear. They become structure. A past narrative can reveal the origin of a pattern without excusing it. This distinction is important. Understanding why someone becomes controlling or violent does not make the control or violence acceptable. Explanation can satisfy curiosity while leaving responsibility intact. The danger of origin stories is that suffering can be mistaken for innocence. Many harmful people have been harmed. Many harmed people do not become harmful. The moral question lies in what a person chooses to do with pain once other lives are within reach. As the past and present begin to echo, the perfect boyfriend image fractures. Relationships that seemed unrelated start to share emotional fingerprints. Possessiveness can dress itself as devotion. Rescue can create obligation. Protection can become a way of deciding who is allowed near someone. A rescuer is not always safe. Sometimes the rescuer appears at the exact moment fear is highest, making gratitude feel like trust. The person who ends the immediate threat becomes associated with relief. The nervous system remembers who was present when danger stopped, even before the mind has enough information to judge him. Relief can imitate attraction. That does not make Sydney's feelings false. It reveals how emotion forms through circumstance. If Tom enters her life while she is frightened, his calmness carries extra weight. He does not merely seem appealing. He becomes the opposite of the man who made her feel unsafe. A manipulator understands contrast. He may not need to appear perfect in absolute terms. He only needs to appear safer than the threat beside him. The possibility that safety itself was staged is almost unbearable. This is the moment when the romantic fantasy becomes a trap. Sydney may have believed Tom appeared because she was lucky. If his arrival was connected to something darker, luck becomes choreography. Her choice was guided before she knew she was choosing. Control is most effective when the controlled person experiences it as coincidence. The murders continue to press the question. Who benefits from Sydney's fear? Who gains access by calming it? Who understands the investigation closely enough to remain one step ahead? The answers do not align cleanly, and that uncertainty keeps the story unstable. Suspicion moves between people because evidence in a thriller rarely points in only one direction. A former relationship, a friend's behavior, a hidden history, or a professional connection can each create a plausible path. The listener begins to experience Sydney's difficulty. Everyone looks different under the light of murder. The danger of this state is that fear can isolate her. When a person no longer knows whom to trust, she may withdraw from the very relationships capable of testing reality. A killer or manipulator benefits from that withdrawal. Alone, Sydney must evaluate every clue using the same exhausted mind that is also managing terror. Connection becomes a form of protection. A trusted friend can remember what Sydney has forgotten. A detective can place a detail inside a larger pattern. A woman who encountered the same man can convert private discomfort into corroboration. Shared information threatens anyone whose power depends on separate stories. This principle extends beyond crime fiction. Deception survives through controlled comparison. A dishonest partner tells each person a different version. A predatory employer isolates complaints. An abuser calls outside concern, jealousy, or interference. The target is encouraged to treat secrecy as loyalty. The moment people compare notes, the special explanation becomes a repeated method. Sydney's world grows more dangerous as the boundaries between private romance and public investigation collapse. She cannot keep Tom in one mental room and the murdered women in another. Every affectionate encounter now carries the sound of the unanswered case. The body often recognizes this collision before the mind does. A familiar touch feels unfamiliar. A room that once felt intimate seems to have fewer exits. The person notices how much stronger the partner is, where the phone has been placed, how far the neighbors are. Nothing may have changed externally. Knowledge changes architecture. A locked door once meant privacy. Now it may mean confinement. A quiet apartment once meant peace. Now it means no witness. A boyfriend who knows her schedule once seemed attentive. Now that knowledge feels operational. This reversal is the emotional engine of the story. Romance and danger use many of the same materials: attention, privacy, vulnerability, anticipation, the desire to be chosen. The difference lies in consent and purpose. Love says, "I see you, and your freedom matters." Possession says, "I see you, and therefore you belong within my design." The serial killer investigation intensifies the theme because murder is the final expression of control. The victim can no longer contradict the story told about her. Her choices, voice, and future are removed. The killer becomes the last person to define the encounter. Sydney's resistance begins with refusing that definition. She must remain a thinking person inside a narrative designed to turn women into victims. She must observe without letting fear freeze her, seek help without knowing whom to trust, and accept that the truth may destroy the relationship she wanted. Courage here is not cinematic fearlessness. It is action taken while the body is insisting that action is dangerous. She may doubt herself. She may make a choice that appears wrong. She may trust a person who has not earned it or distrust someone telling the truth. Those errors do not weaken the story. They make survival believable. Terror narrows attention. Attachment distorts judgment. Information arrives out of order. Perfect decisions belong to people reading backward from the ending. Sydney is living forward. That is why blaming a character for missing clues is so easy and so shallow. The audience knows the genre. Sydney does not hear ominous music when Tom enters a room. She does not see the title hovering above her life. She encounters a man in a world where most charming doctors are not murderers. The audience's certainty is manufactured by context, just as Sydney's trust may be manufactured by Tom. Both are being guided. A strong psychological thriller uses that guidance against the listener. It encourages suspicion, rewards it, then reveals that suspicion itself may have been too simple. The apparently perfect boyfriend could be the obvious answer. Yet obvious answers in this kind of story often conceal another arrangement of guilt, loyalty, and motive. The crucial question becomes larger than one identity. Who is using whom? Who knows more than they admit? Which relationship began in affection and which began in strategy? When the story's revelations arrive, they force earlier scenes into new shapes. A person once read as vulnerable may hold unexpected power. Someone who seemed protective may have been controlling the direction of danger. A clue that appeared to prove guilt may instead reveal knowledge, fear, or complicity. The listener is made to experience the same instability Sydney feels. Certainty forms, breaks, and reforms. This is not simply a game of twists. At its best, the reversal reveals a truth about human judgment. We do not evaluate facts in a vacuum. We arrange them according to the story that currently feels most coherent. Change the story, and the same fact points somewhere else. A man knows a detail about a victim. If he is innocent, the knowledge may show proximity. If he is guilty, it may show obsession. If someone else told him, it may show manipulation. Facts are stubborn, but meaning is relational. The investigation, therefore, depends on sequence. Who knew what and when? Who had access? Who changed a story after new information became public? Who seemed frightened before there was an obvious reason to be frightened? Time exposes constructed innocence. A lie can imitate emotion. It struggles to imitate chronology. Sydney's growing awareness changes her behavior. She cannot confront danger as though she were resolving an ordinary disagreement. If Tom is innocent, accusation may destroy trust. If he is guilty, confrontation may remove the protection of being underestimated. This creates a brutal silence. She must continue speaking naturally while every word is being evaluated for risk. She may sit across from the man she loves and wonder whether he can hear suspicion in her breathing. The performance has reversed. At first, Tom may have been presenting a safe identity to Sydney. Now Sydney must present a trusting identity to him. That reversal gives her temporary power, but it carries emotional cost. Pretending affection around someone you fear produces a particular kind of dissociation. The body performs familiarity while the mind watches from a distance. A smile becomes camouflage. A kiss becomes information. Ordinary intimacy becomes unbearable because it requires suppressing the truth of the nervous system. She learns what a constructed self feels like from the inside. Unlike the deceiver, she is not performing for access. She is performing for survival. The difference is moral and psychological. His mask expands control. Hers creates enough space to escape it. The story's violence remains frightening because it is not treated as spectacle. The murdered women matter as the consequence of someone else's belief that desire grants ownership. Their deaths cast a moral weight over the romance. Sydney cannot dismiss the possibility of danger merely because Tom makes her feel special. Other women may have felt special too. This is a painful realization in any deceptive relationship. The gestures that felt unique may be part of a repeated script. The favorite restaurant, the carefully timed compliment. The confession designed to create closeness. Repetition does not make the target's feelings unreal, but it changes the meaning of the performance that produced them. A serial deceiver does not always improvise. He refines. Each relationship teaches him which explanation works, how quickly to escalate intimacy, and what kind of woman responds to which kind of vulnerability. Practice can look like compatibility. Sydney's intelligence lies not in never being fooled, but in becoming willing to revise. Revision is emotionally expensive. It requires admitting that a desired future may have been built on false premises. Many people continue believing a lie not because the evidence is weak, but because the identity attached to the lie is precious. Sydney wants to be the woman who finally found a good man. The investigation may require her to become the woman who escaped one. Those identities carry different kinds of pride. The first is socially rewarded. The second often comes with shame, questions, and the exhausting task of explaining why she stayed as long as she did. Yet escape is not failure. Recognizing danger after intimacy begins is not less valuable than recognizing it at the door. Human beings are not security systems. We learn through exposure, inconsistency, and time. The final movement of the story turns on the collapse of assumptions. The person who appears to occupy the center of danger may not be the only one carrying secrets. The past does not stay in the past, and the murders cannot be understood through the present romance alone. Old choices have matured into present consequences. When hidden relationships and motives come into view, Sydney realizes that the perfect boyfriend question was both essential and incomplete. The threat is not simply a stranger who lied on an app. It is a network of history, obsession, protection, and violence in which people have been interpreting one another for years. The truth is more intimate than the headline. A serial killer can be described through numbers and patterns. The people near him experience something more confusing. They experience ordinary moments beside the possibility of monstrous acts. They may receive kindness from the same person who causes terror elsewhere. This contradiction creates loyalty, denial, and sometimes participation. People protect what they cannot bear to redefine. A parent may protect a child. A lover may protect a partner. A friend may protect the version of someone she has known for years. Protection can begin as love and end as permission. The story asks where that transformation occurs. Is it when the first suspicion is dismissed? When evidence is hidden? When a victim is treated as less real than the person being protected? Loyalty becomes dangerous when preserving one relationship requires sacrificing another person's truth. Sydney must decide which truth she is willing to live with. The answer cannot be found in Tom's charm, his profession, or the emotional relief he once gave her. It must come from behavior under pressure. When the image cracks, what does he protect first? Sydney's safety or his own story? Does he move toward transparency or does he create more confusion? Does his fear concern the murdered women or the possibility of being exposed? Pressure reveals priorities. Charm works best in controlled conditions. A pleasant dinner gives a person time to choose every word. Crisis reduces that control. The rehearsed self may remain polished, but small fractures appear: impatience, contempt, a sudden demand for obedience, and anger that treats another person's independence as betrayal. Sydney begins to understand that the opposite of love is not always hatred. Sometimes it is entitlement. Hatred recognizes another person enough to oppose her. Entitlement treats her as an object whose choices are meaningful only when they align with the desired outcome. A possessive person can appear intensely loving because he pays constant attention. The test is what happens when attention does not produce control. If Sydney says no, does Tom still see her as a full person? If she doubts him, does he answer the doubt or punish the doubter? If she leaves, does he grieve or does he pursue as though access has been stolen? These questions distinguish attachment from ownership. The investigation reaches its terrifying edge when knowledge can no longer remain private. Once the killer understands that Sydney sees the pattern, the relationship changes. She is no longer merely a possible partner. She is evidence with a voice. Her survival depends on keeping that voice. This is where psychological fear becomes physical urgency. The same city that once offered anonymity now becomes a maze of unknown proximity. A crowded street may provide witnesses, but it can also hide pursuit. A phone connects her to help, but it may reveal where she is. Home offers familiar locks, yet a boyfriend may already know how to enter. Every safety measure contains a vulnerability because the threat has been invited close. That invitation should not be mistaken for consent to harm. Trust grants specific access, not permanent ownership. A key given in affection does not authorize entry after fear begins. A shared secret does not authorize surveillance. Intimacy never removes the right to withdraw. The climax of a story like this is not only about identifying the killer. It is about Sydney reclaiming the authority to define what happens next. For much of the narrative, men's intentions dominate the field. Dates misrepresent themselves. A boyfriend appears to offer safety. Investigators interpret victims. A killer chooses targets. Sydney's agency grows when she stops existing mainly as the object of someone else's choice. She chooses what to believe. She chooses whom to contact. She chooses whether the fantasy of the relationship is worth the risk of staying. She chooses survival, even when survival requires accepting an ugly truth. That final choice carries grief. Escaping danger does not erase the affection that existed before the danger became clear. A person can feel relief and heartbreak simultaneously. She can hate the deception and miss the version of the relationship she believed in. Emotional contradiction is not evidence that leaving was wrong. It is evidence that the lie was woven through real feeling. The truth eventually rearranges the roles of victim, protector, suspect, and killer. The apparent simplicity of a woman dating the wrong man opens into something more disturbing. People can stand close to evil for very different reasons. Some are deceived, some are afraid, some are loyal. Some recognize the danger and decide it serves them. Complicity has degrees, but consequences do not always respect those degrees. A hidden fact can cost another woman her life. A warning left unspoken can preserve the conditions for the next crime. A person may tell herself she did not cause the violence while repeatedly protecting the person who did. Moral responsibility expands when knowledge expands. Before someone knows, trust may be innocent. After suspicion becomes evidence, silence becomes a choice. Sydney's journey moves across that boundary. She begins as a woman hoping for connection. She becomes a woman forced to evaluate whether connection has placed her inside a pattern of murder. The transformation is not from naive to cynical. It is from externally reassured to internally alert. She learns that safety cannot be borrowed entirely from another person's image. It must also come from her willingness to respond when the image and the evidence no longer match. This is the insight that remains after the twists settle. No one can guarantee that a charming partner is honest. No one can eliminate risk from intimacy. The fantasy of perfect detection is another form of control, and it fails because deception is designed to be believed. A healthier confidence sounds different. I may be fooled for a time. I will not call myself foolish for trusting curated evidence. I will pay attention when patterns emerge. I will not require the person frightening me to agree that my fear is reasonable. I can leave before every mystery is solved. This form of self-trust does not prevent all danger. It reduces the power of shame, and shame is one of danger's favorite hiding places. Sydney's dating fatigue at the beginning makes the ending more meaningful. She wanted the search to be over. By the end, she understands that ending the search is not worth surrendering the right to keep seeing clearly. A relationship should not require blindness as proof of commitment. Trust is not the refusal to investigate contradiction. Trust is what remains when contradiction can be discussed without punishment. The perfect boyfriend image fails because perfection is static. Real people are messy, inconvenient, and gradually knowable. Their flaws appear alongside their care. Their stories become more connected over time. They do not need every detail to strengthen a brand. A manufactured partner can seem more coherent than a real one because he removes the randomness of personality. Every quality has a purpose. The joke builds comfort. The profession builds status. The vulnerability builds intimacy. The rescue builds debt. Too much coherence can be its own inconsistency. The man seems designed because, in some sense, he is. That does not mean every impressive partner is dangerous. It means the listener should notice whether admiration is allowed to coexist with verification. The safest person is not the one who never triggers doubt. It is the one whose response to doubt creates more reality. Reality may be awkward. It may include an embarrassing mistake, a complicated ex, or a career less glamorous than the profile implied. Honest imperfection is usually less dangerous than polished fog. Sydney's experience also exposes the cruelty of asking women to manage male danger perfectly. Society tells women to be open but not gullible, cautious but not paranoid, independent but not cold, trusting but never wrong. If a date goes badly, people ask why she went. If she refuses a date, they ask why she assumes the worst. The rules contradict one another because they are often written backward from the outcome. If nothing happens, caution looks excessive. If violence occurs, caution looks insufficient. The person harmed is judged with information she did not possess before the harm. The story pushes against that judgment. Sydney's responsibility is not to predict a killer from a photograph. It is to keep responding to new information. The killer's responsibility is not reduced by how convincing his disguise was. In fact, the disguise is part of the violation. He does not merely attack trust, he weaponizes it. That is why dating app crime stories touch such a modern nerve. The technology does not create deception, obsession, or violence. It changes scale and speed. A person can approach many strangers while presenting a tailored identity. Geographic distance weakens shared social context. A match can feel personal, even when the same message has been sent repeatedly. The screen creates intimacy before accountability, yet technology also leaves traces. Messages, locations, timestamps, and profiles can contradict the story a person tells. The same system that enables a false identity can preserve fragments of the truth. Digital evidence is emotionally strange. A cheerful message can sit beside the knowledge that the sender was lying. A heart emoji can become part of a murder timeline. The interface remains bright and casual while the meaning becomes unbearable. Sydney's phone, once a portal to possibility, becomes an archive of risk. She scrolls not to remember affection, but to locate inconsistencies. The conversation changes genre beneath her fingers. This is how betrayal feels. The content remains, but the category changes. The boyfriend becomes a suspect. The date becomes a lead. The compliment becomes a tactic. The memory becomes evidence. Still, the final truth resists reducing every tender moment to pure calculation. Human motives are rarely clean. A person can seek control and experience attachment. He can protect someone for selfish reasons and believe the protection is love. He can tell the truth in one moment and use that truth to strengthen a larger lie. Mixed motives do not cancel harm. They explain why harm can be difficult to recognize. Sydney survives psychologically by refusing to let complexity become paralysis. She does not need to decide whether every feeling Tom displayed was false. She needs to decide whether his behavior makes him safe. Those are different questions. People often remain trapped because they are trying to solve the first one. Did he ever love me? Was any of it real? Did he mean the apology? The answers may remain inaccessible. Safety depends on observable conduct, not perfect access to another person's inner life. A person can love in the only way he knows and still be unsafe to love. That sentence removes the false choice between demonizing and returning. Sydney does not need Tom to be emotionless in order to protect herself. She does not need a complete theory of his mind. She needs enough truth to act. Enough truth is often less than certainty. The murders establish that delay has consequences. Every clue ignored is time granted to the unknown person controlling the pattern. Yet reckless accusation can also drive the investigation toward the wrong target. The story balances urgency with discipline. Sydney must learn to distinguish fear from proof without treating fear as meaningless. fear is an alarm, not a verdict. It tells her to look. Evidence tells her where. This partnership between intuition and verification is more reliable than either alone. Intuition without evidence can become projection. Evidence ignored because intuition feels impolite can become danger. The women surrounding the case embody the stakes. They are not simply plot devices arranged around a killer. Each represents a life interrupted by someone else's private mythology. The killer may imagine himself as powerful, wounded, righteous, or irresistible. None of those stories restores what he takes. Violence often depends on a narrative that makes the victim secondary. She becomes an obstacle, a symbol, a betrayal, a type. To resist violence is also to restore individuality. She had plans, habits, people who expected her home, a private joke, a favorite meal, a future that belonged to no one else. Sydney feels the weight of those erased futures as the threat approaches her own. Survival becomes more than escape. It becomes refusal to be reduced to the next woman in a pattern. When the final confrontations strip away performance, the perfect boyfriend fantasy collapses completely. What remains is not a romantic mystery, but a question of power. Who controls the story, who controls movement, and who gets to leave alive with the truth? The answer is not guaranteed by physical strength. Knowledge creates leverage. So does preparation. So does the failure of isolated secrets to remain isolated. A killer may understand fear, but he can still misunderstand the person experiencing it. He may mistake politeness for submission. He may mistake attachment for helplessness. He may mistake a woman's need for time as evidence that she will never act. That mistake becomes the opening. Sydney's strength is not that she becomes invulnerable. It is that vulnerability stops being the same as powerlessness. She is afraid because the threat is real. She moves because fear has finally become clear enough to guide action. After the danger, there is no simple return to normal. The dating apps will look different. A stranger's perfect profile will carry the memory of how easily a life can be arranged into reassuring fragments. Tom's charm will remain proof that pleasant behavior and moral safety are not identical. But cynicism is not the only possible ending. Sydney can retain the desire for connection without treating desire as evidence. She can value attention while watching consistency. She can accept kindness without owing access. She can leave when questions create fog instead of clarity. The lesson is not never trust a boyfriend. It is never outsource your reality to one. This matters because a manipulator's deepest victory is not the lie itself. It is persuading another person that her perception is less trustworthy than his explanation. Once that happens, every future clue arrives already discredited. Sydney reverses that process. She listens again. She compares. She lets facts become more important than the future she wanted. That choice is painful, but pain is not always a sign that the wrong thing is happening. Sometimes it is the cost of returning to reality. The boyfriend leaves us with a disturbing image of modern romance. Two strangers facing each other across a table, each carrying a private history, while one asks whether the other might become part of a future. Most of the time, that uncertainty is ordinary. Sometimes it is beautiful, and sometimes one person already knows far more than the other. The imbalance is where danger grows. One knows the address. One knows the routine. One knows which details were invented. The other knows only the version she was given. Trust narrows that gap when both people move toward truth. Manipulation preserves it. Sydney's perfect boyfriend becomes terrifying, not because he is completely unknowable, but because he appears knowable too quickly. The relationship offers the sensation of certainty before it has earned the substance. That is the trap hidden beneath perfection. A real relationship becomes safer as reality increases. A false one becomes more fragile. Questions threaten it. Friends threaten it. Time threatens it. The past threatens it. The truth does not need to attack the illusion. It only needs enough room to stand beside it. Eventually, Sydney gives it that room. The image she loved and the evidence she feared can no longer occupy the same space. One must yield. She chooses the evidence, not because it is comforting, but because comfort has already been used against her. That choice saves more than her life. It saves her ability to believe herself after someone else worked to make belief feel unreasonable. Late at night, the most unsettling part of the story is not the idea that a serial killer might hide behind a charming profile. It is the recognition that every form of intimacy asks us to step toward a person before we know everything. There is no love without that risk. The answer cannot be permanent suspicion. It has to be a form of trust that remains awake. Trust that can ask a question. Trust that does not confuse professional status with character. Trust that notices when rescue creates debt. Trust that allows another person to be imperfect but refuses to make confusion the price of staying. Sydney begins by wanting a man who will finally make dating feel safe. She ends with something more durable. The knowledge that safety cannot depend entirely on a man's performance. A perfect boyfriend can be invented. A consistent human being must be observed. And when the smile, the story, and the evidence stop matching, the most important match is no longer the one that appeared on the screen. It is the moment a woman looks at the danger in front of her, recognizes the voice inside herself, and decides that no relationship is worth becoming silent enough to disappear.